We've reached the final hour, the post trip on Nemo Nation. Take it away, Phone Master Dre.
I'll let Dave take it away. Why don't you do that there, Dave?
Where should I take it? I don't know where to go or what to do when I get there. Hey, I'll tell you what, we're going to talk to a young woman right now who knows where to go and what to do when she gets there. She started the Wharton, over in Texas now, she started the Wharton County Recovery Team in 2016, and that was just in time to get ready for something that nobody was ready for, and nobody can believe it happened if you were there, Hurricane Harvey in 2017. Evelyn Carriere is with us. Evelyn, welcome to the Degas House here in Nemo Nation. Good morning.
Good morning. Hi. Yeah. Like he said, I'm Evelyn Carriere. Nice to be here. How are you today?
Doing pretty good, as a matter of fact. We've had the most beautiful, I couldn't, we've been in the room here. I got here at about 5:30 this morning. We go on at 7. So I walked outside to meet you, and I couldn't believe how gorgeous it is outside here in New Orleans.
It is so nice today. And it's really peculiar for this time of year as well, which kind of worries me because, we're still in hurricane season.
Say it. Do not you say that.
but that's my forte is disaster recovery and hazard mitigation. And like you said, the Wharton County Recovery Team, the foundation that I had started, is on the basis of disaster recovery. Mm-hmm. So it's just something that I live with. It's just this baseline of preparedness that you have to have during this season, especially if you live in the South. And I know that it's becoming more prominent to be prepared and to make sure that everything that you have is in store. And we have the anniversary of Katrina coming up too. But it still makes me nervous whenever we have too good of weather before hurricane season ends, because I'm am I enjoying this too much? And I don't want to enjoy good weather too much so that it doesn't get spoiled by a really bad hurricane.
We had Kathy Fulton on. She was with us last week from ALAN, the American Logistics Aid Network, and I know that you've taken a look at
I did. Her interview was really interesting.
Yeah.
She's a really interesting, and I actually looked into that organization because having worked with FEMA, Army Corps of Engineers, and all of these different entities over the years, I had actually never heard of that organization. Mm-hmm. And I looked into it, and it was something that I was thinking, if we would have had that logistics or been able to coordinate with them post Harvey, Texas had just never been through anything like that before. And I had started my organization in conjunction with FEMA. They had approached me when I was a journalist. Mm-hmm. So I was 24 at the time. I was what felt like a child myself.
You're the same age as Madison.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
Great. Yeah. So when I was 24, when I was 24, they had approached, FEMA had come to me in 2016 after 400 people in my small community in Wharton, Texas was impacted by this tax day flood is what we called it. Mm-hmm. And the community that was impacted the most was the Black community. It was what we called across the railroad tracks. And that community was impacted most because it was a part of redlining and all of those things that had happened back in the day. And so the community was just utterly devastated. But we couldn't get any kind of funding. I had set up this nonprofit, this 501c3, this recovery team, had no prior training on how to do anything, but I was a former grant writer. So they had ended up pulling me and saying, hey, we just need you to set this up. We're going to try and send resources your way. I spent a year writing grants. No one really cared. They were whatever, 400 people in a small rural community of our entire county only has 42,000 people. The city that was impacted only had a population of 9,000. They didn't care about that. They were we don't care that this many people were impacted. Their houses were flooded. This is not that big of a deal. So whenever they had ended up approaching me, the only grants that I received was a $33,000 grant for washers and dryers. And I was what am I supposed to do? I ended up getting, I wrote it, they delivered the washers and dryers, and this was from the American Red Cross. Mm-hmm. I had to store them one, I had to work out the logistics. So I had to call a bunch of truck drivers and be like, will you come? And it's not like I know how to operate a forklift. I didn't have a team of people. I had to find someone who could operate a forklift, which happened to be the mayor of our city.
Of course.
He was like the mayor of the city that I lived in, owned a feed store. He also was a truck driver. He knew how to operate a forklift. He was like, I'll do this for you, Evelyn, and unload these washers and dryers at a church, because that was also one of the only resources. And then, unfortunately, the next year, Hurricane Harvey happened, and we got trapped in what we call a bowl. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And you all are very familiar with this in New Orleans specifically. That same exact thing happened. They sent the Creole Navy to us. You know, they had sent a bunch of people to try and rescue us from outside of this bowl, but the National Guard tried to come in and bring food, but they didn't know how to get through the roads. And so I was saying, logistically, we had local truck drivers and truck drivers who had been coming to this neighborhood, specifically grocers that worked with HEB in their disaster recovery unit. And they ended up finding ways into our small community and bringing food to the American Red Cross shelter that we set up ourselves as community members. And one of the truck drivers ended up picking up, there was this kid on the side of the road that had rode his bike so much to where like the tires had fallen off of the bike, like the rubber. Yeah. And by the time he got to the shelter, because a truck driver had like picked him up off of the side of the road as he was like trying to walk his bike, because there was no other way into the community, into the shelter, and picked him up and brought him to the shelter with food and resources. So truck driving has been like a really big part of disaster recovery. And it's one of those things, that a gap that needs to be filled whenever you're setting up your nonprofit for disaster recovery and hazard mitigation. You need to like forge these connections with people in your community that know, one, how to drive those trucks, two, how to get food to people post disaster, and three, like know these routes better, back ways that don't flood, or because it's the ways in that the National Guard know. You know, you can find those on GPS and maps, but there are roads that people do not know in rural communities that are not on maps.
You know, Rodney Dangerfield told a story about, in one of the lines in the story, he was lost out in the country. He says, "Can you tell me how to get to the American Legion Hall?" He says, "Yeah, you just go down this road for a piece and you turn left where the old schoolhouse used to be." Right? Yeah. Everybody lives there knows where the old schoolhouse used to be. And if you don't know that, you can't help it. You're lost. So you've got to depend on the folks you have right there. I mean, people always think about disaster relief and mitigation, about folks from out of town, out of state, coming in to help, which happens, of course, and it's wonderful. But you got to have that core that knows where the old schoolhouse used to be and that you turn left at. Yes, and
this was one of the issues that we had. When people do come in from out of town, it's wonderful. Like, we love it. We love the help. Money is the best thing that you can do, is to send, because when you send too many resources, imagine how many washers and dryers was that? Do you remember the count on that? I think it was like, I think it was somewhere around 45 washers and dryers. It was not many. That first year it was a pretty rough year. Yeah. The second year, though, like post Harvey, we had so many resources that we had to stop taking donations. We had went from we had to borrow storage facilities from people. We had 18-wheelers coming in, and like I said, I didn't know how to work a forklift. We had 12 board members at this time, and none of, we had a lot of folks that were pastors and religious leaders, and we had realized that, like, if we don't reach out to people who know how to operate this machinery, and we have so many people coming in who needed to go pick up all of these things from other communities, these communities had, what they had ended up doing was putting together like beds and truck beds full of resources for our community, food, diapers, whatever you can think of. We had no way to get it to us. We had to, like, once again, call on truck drivers to go pick up those things, or these communities. And they were doing this on their own time and on their own dime.
Yeah, exactly.
And it was like, I mean, imagine, how much it costs to fill up those trucks. And then you're driving this across the country to try and help out these communities. And what ended up happening was, like, they would bring it there, and then the mayor would come with his forklift, unload it, and then we would have to find ways to distribute it, which was amazing. But we were such a small community, we ended up being inundated with so much stuff that we would have to find a truck driver again to take it out of our community to, like, a larger one.
Who also needed stuff.
Yes, who still needed a lot of resources, but we were so inundated with so many different, which is not a bad thing. Like, that's a wonderful thing.
Yeah, exactly. An embarrassment of riches.
Yes, and the same thing ended up happening with trash on the street. Disposing of the things that we would muck out of the houses. We had this organization called Team Rubicon come into our community, and they're such a lovely, it's kind of like a ex-military. Anyone who had, like, been in the military anywhere in the world can join Team Rubicon. And what ends up happening post-disaster is they mobilize, and they come into your community, and they help you, like, muck out the houses, take out sheetrock, anything that was damaged by the water. And all of that stuff ends up going to the street. Well, it's also really difficult to get all of that stuff off of the street once it's there. So we had, once again, just like truck drivers come in, fill up their trucks with this stuff, and haul it to the junkyards. It was just like a really integral part of disaster recovery. And once again, it was just our own community members, and community members that knew how to get to rural areas, because rural areas are often forgotten in post-disaster.
Yeah, and I think possibly, you kind of, I was thinking of a little quip. You have to recover from the disaster, and then you have to recover from the recovery. Because all you're doing is moving you're not getting rid of anything. You're just moving it from the bedroom to the curb, so to speak. And now it's a problem. And if you got too much stuff there, then people can't get down the street because of the stuff coming out of the bedroom to the curb. So this domino effect keeps, popping. You're never done.
No, and it's a logistics nightmare as well.
Yeah, exactly.
And getting onto these streets with these big trucks, and knowing which streets can handle these loads and how heavy they are. Like, a lot of the truck drivers in our community are mostly hauling groceries or gravel. So, like, that's like the industry that I was very used to, is like, anyone that was coming through here was like either building reservoirs or digging up gravel or hauling those things, or end up bringing groceries into our community. And they were such a big part of helping out post-disaster that I started to think that I ended up keeping like a Rolodex of truck drivers that I could call on after a disaster to help us do all of this stuff, because FEMA doesn't have a Rolodex of truck drivers. The Army Corps of Engineers doesn't have a Rolodex of truck drivers. They've got people who can do the National Guard trucks, but they can only have provisions to do very specific things and not what actual community members need. And so you have to call on your actual community and people who do this commercially, not people who do it for the government, because the government has so many different restrictions on what you can do with their specific resources. Well,
you kind of bring us into another area here too that I want to get into with you, and that is something that we hear a lot about in terms of infrastructure, especially now, and that's public-private partnerships. And you say that that's key to disaster relief. In other words, I'm not surprised, but I am surprised that FEMA wouldn't have a Rolodex with a bunch of truck drivers' names in it. What's up with that, right?
Yeah, so FEMA, with the odd thing, I was so shocked when I was approached by FEMA as to what I felt like a 24-year-old kid, because And I thought it was odd that they were asking me specifically to start this organization. I knew nothing about this when I started. I knew nothing about.
Get the shortest straw. How did that happen?
Well, I was a journalist at the time, and I was covering a meeting that FEMA had, and they had asked everyone to start up and do something specific with the work that you do. So mass media communications. And so I had set up a table, and I had ended up organizing the entire meeting because I was also covering it for the newspaper.
Okay.
And FEMA was like, "Oh, you're extremely organized." And I was like, well, because I have to be, and I'm covering this for the newspaper, so I'm counting all the people in the room, and I'm doing all the things that you normally do as a journalist. And one of the women was like, "Yeah, we're going to need you for this community." And I was like, "No, I don't. No, thank you." She hands me this like huge binder. I swear to you, it was like a 6-inch binder. And she was like, you can read this, and I need you to start this organization." And I pushed it away from me, and I was like, "No, thank you." I was like, "I can't do that. Like, I don't know."
It almost sounds biblical here.
I was like, "I don't know what I'm doing." And so she hands me all of this stuff, and I had looked into recovery teams. And I had previously had, working with the Boys and Girls Club, written a lot of grants and like worked with nonprofits. So I was like, maybe I can do this. And she was like, "Well, you're needed, a call to the community." And my beat was at the time the commissioner's court and city council and police blotter. So I was used to being a huge part of the community, but I guess on the back end, like I was a voyeur, I was on the outside looking in. And she was asking me to actively be a part of the community. I didn't know how to do that. So I ended up doing all of this stuff and just realizing that government reaching out to communities to try and fend for themselves, but not really giving them all the resources that they need to do it. And then us having to look at private and commercial ways to get the funding that we need, because the mass majority of the funding that we got was private funding, hospitals, commercialized things. Even like I told you, the mayor of our community who owned a feed store was like one of the largest resources that I had ended up needing. And he was a really good guy, and I loved working with him, but he was anti-establishment as well. He was like anti-government, but ended up being like the mayor of our community. It was really interesting. And he's still a good friend of mine. He's like a really nice guy. He's just peculiar in the ways that he would call himself anti-establishment, but was really, really critical when it came to like doing a lot of stuff post-disaster. But like I said, I ended up having to forge those connections in our community in order to even get the resources that we need. And the government wants you to make those connections with privatized industry, but doesn't give you anything that you need in order to make those connections or even tell you how to do that.
Not in their wheelhouse.
No, and I suppose it like they will, I guess in order to get like the large block grants that you need, you have to have like an operating budget of about $500,000 in order to even qualify for those large block grants. Mm-hmm. Well, I'm from a small town. I didn't think that we would ever get an operating budget of $500,000 a year, especially with our first year being $33,000 in washers and dryers, and that's the only thing that we had. But we ended up getting, after Hurricane Harvey, and this is how bad we got hit, we had ended up writing somewhere upwards of $72 million in grants.
Wow.
And infrastructurally, we use those grants, and we had to get special permission.
Which this is like the next year.
Yeah, this is just the next.
So you're 24 years old. They hand you the 6-inch binder and say, "Here, read this. There will be a test on Monday. By the way, you got the job anyway, so just read it, right?"
Yeah.
Okay. So now you're doing this, and then in less than a year's time, Harvey hits, mm-hmm. and it goes from ground 2 to ground million.
Yeah.
It's just crazy.
And it was just you
must have been overwhelmed.
So overwhelmed. I did end up getting like a significant amount of burnout after that, because mind you, this was all, I did not get paid. So this was all done while I was a journalist. Mm-hmm. And we had a need for like case managers, board members, people who we had to have psychiatrists, any kind of help that we specifically needed. We ended up having a staff of 12 after like I had done like 2 years of labor, and the board members as well, because we had 12 board members, and everyone was doing like the same amount of work. We were getting
But
off.
nobody had any type of experience with anything like
none
this.
of us.
Yeah.
And we were all just coming together. And what we had was like specifically what recovery teams do is unmet needs in your community. So you have like a lot of organizations that come in and give people what they need. And what my organization did was cover the unmet needs. So we would have this round table every week. We had all of our case managers come in and present cases, and they would go to the table, and there would be like Catholic Charities, Army Corps of Engineers, FEMA would be there as well, United Way, any kind of organization that gives help to communities would sit at the unmet needs table. And the case managers would present these cases and be like, I have someone who needs $8,000 for a roof. Is anyone at this table able to cover this $8,000? And Catholic Charities would be like, yes, we have $8,000. We'll go ahead and cover this roof. So they would write down Catholic Charities. Catholic Charities would cut them a check, and then they would get the roof done for that. So that was like the sole purpose of the organization. But we ended up running into projects that most long-term recovery teams don't do, which was a coordination with the city to do different levee building, right? So like we had a levee that broke in our community. And then we were deficient of a levee, which had ended up being the reason why in 2016 the tax day flood happened. So we needed millions of dollars for these levees. We ended up getting special approval, the levee funded by the Army Corps of Engineers, or the levee was actually funded by FEMA, and then the Army Corps of Engineers built this levee. And that was something that is not possible. They don't really let you cross-pollinate projects from the government. So
Please don't let that happen.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So they're like, FEMA was like, we can give you the money, but we can't build it. And the Army Corps of Engineers was like, we can build it, but we don't have the money to do it.
Yeah.
So we had written a letter to President Trump at the time, and we had to ask special permission to use both of these entities so that we could actually do this. And he had allowed us to like actually build these levees and utilize this money. And we had ended up so out of the 72 million at the time when I left my organization, only 2.5 was monetarily distributed to the community, and the rest was built in infrastructure. We ended up doing projects with HUD, the housing development, and then we ended up building, I think it was 180 different apartment complexes, because not only did Hurricane Harvey happen, and since we were a long-term recovery team, it wasn't just floods that we covered, it was any major disaster that happened in the area. Mm-hmm. So there was an apartment complex that had 80 units that burned down. And you're talking about a community of 9,000 people, so 80 apartment complexes burning down is like, it's a big blow to the community.
Yeah.
And then we also had a hurricane that took, not just a hurricane, but a tornado that took out a row of 10 houses in our so in the same year, in 2017, fire, tornado, and hurricane had just devastated our entire community. And there was just this massive need for building. So we had and luckily I had, we had this wonderful city manager who helped with all of this paperwork. And I worked in conjunction with the city to end up building this infrastructure. We used my organization to do all of this work through, and then ended up working with the city to rebuild this. And I ended up going back home last year because I was working with this organization called Emergency Legal Responders, where they do post-disaster legal services, free legal services for anyone who needs help filling out appeals or claims with FEMA, or anyone who can't understand the legalese in this. And I ended up going back home and taking the organization with me so that they could see the work that I had done back in my home community. And the mayor, I went to his feed store to like introduce him to my friends. And they were like, your mayor works at a feed store? And I was like, well, he owns a feed store. And I went to the feed store and he wasn't there. And they were like, well, he's over at his friend Freddie's shop. And he owns like a truck shop and a car shop. And he was like, he's over sitting at Freddie's shop. So I went over to Freddie's shop and then and I was like, hey, I'm here with emergency legal responders. And he was like, let's go look at everything that's happened since you've been gone. And so I hopped into his truck. Me and my coworkers hopped into his truck and he drove us around for about 4 hours, showing us all the development, showing us everything. So since I had left, he said that infrastructurally it had been like $132 million is what we had ended up putting back into the community through the organization that I founded. So I left at 72, came back 4 years later, and it was at 132 million.
Awesome. That is awesome. Our listeners are mainly on the road or in the trucking industry. So they are certainly familiar with disasters. Many of them have helped, certainly Katrina here in New Orleans. But we talked about Kathy with Alan and everything. We've had folks talk about disaster relief and how this works. I don't think anybody has given us that ground level, pull the curtain back, look at what really goes on behind the curtain with this stuff. With a 24-year-old kid running the whole operation in a small town in Texas. I mean, come on, this is an awesome story. It really is.
Still better than Michael Brown. Sorry about that. Sorry. Katrina dies very, very hard around here.
Yeah.
It's really nice to meet you. Thank you for making the time, by the way.
You're welcome. Yeah, it's been great to be here.
Send us to any socials you got. Where should people find out more about you?
Honestly, I just have like my own private social media, Instagram. I mean, you can find me on LinkedIn if you do have any professional questions. It's just Evelyn Carriere on LinkedIn. If you want to find me personally, follow me on Instagram. It's also just Evelyn Carriere. But those organizations that I talked about, if you need free legal advice post-disaster, and this is labor stuff as well, you can follow Emergency Legal Responders, which is a great organization. They give out free legal advice on Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn, all of those organizations. So
yeah, and a lot of that stuff is very, very helpful. I mean, we are on the just a couple of days away now for the anniversary, 20 years.
I know.
20 years. It seems like forever ago, and yet it seems like it was only yesterday. By the way, thank you for being the last guest on Nemo Nation.
Thank you for having me.
You were a member of the nation before you even arrived on the scene. It's really great. And by the way, what a perfect name for a guest to end the segment with, right, Dave?